Okay, amplitude. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about one of the second elements of audio, which is amplitude. And amplitude, when it really comes right down to it, is how we perceive loudness. Now, what exactly is amplitude? Amplitude is the amount of pressure change a vibrating body creates in an elastic medium. It all goes back to what is sound. Sound is molecules vibrating in an elastic medium. This is talking about how much pressure change is happening in the elastic medium. This pressure change is measured in a unit that is called decibels, or dB for short. dB is, or decibel, is a unit of measure expressing a ratio of changes in power or intensity. dB, or also sometimes SPL, which stands for sound pressure level, measure the pressure of a sound wave. In general, as I said, is expressed in decibels, or dB. We perceive it as loudness. All right, loudness is the same as volume, is the same as magnitude. But all comes right down to being about amplitude. Amplitude, as we said earlier, is the amount of intensity, magnitude of the pressure change between compression and rarefaction in a sound wave, and we call this amplitude. But it's all about how loud do we perceive these pressure changes. You have, let's call this your speaker, and it's making sound. Those sound waves hit air, which bump more air, which bump more air. The stronger that push, the louder it's going to be. The weaker that push, the softer it's going to be. Amplitude, if we're looking at this on a chart, is the height of the sound wave. Amplitude is, we measure it as from the peak or the trough. That is your amplitude. How strong? As it goes up, that's your pressure going up. Loud sounds have a very strong amplitude. That means that it is a big pressure change because more air molecules are being displaced. If you've ever been at a rock concert or outside by some speakers and they're really loud and you actually feel the sound of the speaker pulsing into you, you're literally feeling those air molecules being pushed by the speaker. Soft sounds have very small amplitudes because they're very small pressure changes. Very fewer air molecules are being displaced. Amplitude, again, as we talked about, is on the chart, is represented by height on a sound wave. The greater the vibration, the greater the source. Also, the greater the energy carried by the wave. The greater the amplitude of the wave, the louder the perceived volume. On the other side, the smaller the vibration, the lower the energy, the smaller the amplitude, and the softer the perceived volume. It's all amplitude. When we're talking about amplitude, this is all about power. How strong is that sound source hitting you? If you've ever been around a loud bang, sometimes you can almost feel it hit you. You know, feel the air hit you almost like a wave. If you've ever been around a loud bass system, you'll feel that going boom, 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 boom into your chest because those lower notes require more power. This power is going to hit you hard and you'll feel it thumping. Human hearing. All right, how much can we take? Our ears can actually only take so much pressure changes before they start to hurt or we get permanent damage. And we only hear things so loud. The way that we hear things, or how we measure what we can hear, or the range of human hearing, from minimum to threshold of pain, well, scientifically it goes from 1 to 10 million increments, but that would be really difficult to put on a stereo system or to measure. And so they've put together an algorithm, and it goes from 0 to 140 decibels. Again, we talk about things in dB, decibels. And the range of human hearing from nothing on up to the threshold of pain is 140. Dynamic range, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next lecture, but as far as human hearing is concerned, dynamic range is the range between the softest, oops, wrong button. Dynamic range is the range between the softest to the loudest. We'll talk in the next lecture about dynamic range of microphones and speaker systems, because that's a little bit different, but the concept is still the same. We're talking about going from the softest thing to the loudest thing you can hear. But dynamic range of human hearing is 0 dB is the threshold of hearing. Are there things that are quieter than 0 dB that exist? Yes, but we cannot hear them as human beings. And then 140 dB is the threshold of pain for adults. If you go above 140 dB, your ears are going to ring, your ears are going to be sore. And if you're pushing 140, even like 130, that range for a long period of time, your ears eventually going to start to hurt and could cause some serious permanent damage. However, at 120 dB is the threshold of pain for kids. If you've ever been around a small child at a rock concert and they're holding their ears going, it's too loud, it's too loud, it's not the kid crying for special attention. It's literally young kids. Keep in mind their ears are smaller than ours, they haven't been around as long, they just haven't developed to be able to handle louder noises, and so small children have very sensitive ears. And so keep that in mind if you're out with a small child, that just because it doesn't hurt your ears doesn't mean it won't hurt the child's ears. All right, let's put this in real world terms. The harder you beat a drum, for example, the greater the amplitude. Think of it this way: if you hit a drum really hard, you're putting a lot more energy into that drum. That drum's surface is going to push and vibrate those air molecules very strongly and make a louder sound, a stronger amplitude. Our sensitivity to loudness is not a linear thing. If you look at this chart over here, this chart sort of gives you a rough idea of what human hearing is. We are very sensitive to differences in the loudness of soft sounds. That is going from nothing to 20 to 40 to 60. So if you're in a very empty theater where everyone's talking like a whisper, on up to walking around a quiet neighborhood to a conversation, as things get moderately louder and louder and louder, you'll notice those increments as they happen. But the louder things become, the more difficult it is to differentiate between small changes in loudness. So let's say you're at a rock concert and they take it from 8 on up to 11. It just goes from being loud to loud, maybe a little bit louder, but once it gets to be to a certain point, our ears really can't tell the difference between super loud and even louder than super loud. It's just the nature of how we hear. Because if you think about it, going back to primitive man in the forest, we're going to be wanting to be very sensitive to hearing things at night, hear an animal walking across the forest and trying to tell the difference between, is that a lion walking around or is that a squirrel walking around? We're going to be very careful to hear those small, quiet, subtle sounds of things that might be sneaking up on us. But not so much. We never really had to worry about predators that were incredibly loud, and so our ears just never became so sensitive to the super loud sounds. And it's just they really can't handle separating certain things after a certain point. It's just loud. But lower, softer sounds we are a lot more sensitive to. Loudness measurements that take this into character. I can't speak. Loudness measurements that take this characteristic into account are also expressed as sound pressure levels, or simply SPL. And you use SPL, and pretty much we still just call it dB. Occasionally you will see SPL on things, but dB is by far the most common standard for measuring these things. Sometimes you'll see acoustic instruments with this sort of written as dB, SPL, but in many cases it is just going to be dB. And so pretty much from now on in this class, I'll be referring to everything as good old-fashioned dB. The softest sound detectable by the human ear is defined as 0 dB, but of course there may be individual differences. Some people are a bit more sensitive to hearing things that are soft than other ones. At the other end of the scale, the loudest sound the human can handle for short periods, emphasis this on short periods, without discomfort or possible damage, is 120. 140 you can take, but it's going to hurt. Okay, that's why some people can go to rock concerts. But if you go to a rock concert every day without wearing some kind of ear protection, you're going to have significant hearing loss. I think I've talked about my father-in-law. He's a former race car driver, and loud engines, no mufflers, and he has a very hard time hearing things. He's always going, what? Because too many years of those loud noises have taken away some of his abilities to hear on certain levels. So, in short, little speech again earlier that I gave you, but protect your ears. Prolonged exposure to loud sound pressure levels can cause tinnitus, which is that ringing in your ears that people can get. So you need to learn to listen carefully and pay attention to sounds where, when you hear them, and think about how they work. But you want to be thinking about, whenever you hear a sound, you're dealing with amplitude. When you're talking about sound, talking about amplitude, it's that height is our amplitude, and that equals power or volume. Thank you.